Hi, friends. Welcome back to True Crime Echoes. I hope you're having a good day so far. Today, I want to take you back in time to a story that haunted a small town in Georgia, a story that starts with a smiling waitress at a popular diner and ends with one of the most chilling murder cases the state has ever seen. On the surface, Anjette Lyles was beautiful, charming, and adored by almost everyone who met her. She ran a bustling diner where people gathered for comfort food and good company. But behind the counter, beneath the charm, a dark secret was unfolding. Husbands, family members, even her own daughter, one by one, they all died under mysterious circumstances. This isn't just the story of a woman who killed for money. It's a story about how appearances can deceive, how someone can manipulate an entire community, and how justice sometimes comes too late. So settle in, because this is the case of Anjette Lyles, the deadly diner queen of Macon, Georgia. Chapter 1. Behind the Diner's Smile. Hi, friends. I hope you're doing well today. I want to take you back in time to a small southern town in the 1950s, where life on the surface seemed quiet, familiar, almost comforting. People gathered at their favorite diner after church families raised children on modest incomes, and everyone knew everyone else's business. But underneath that picture of small-town charm was a story so disturbing it still makes people in Georgia whisper decades later. This isn't the kind of case where the danger came from a stranger lurking in the shadows. No, this one came from someone who smiled at you as she poured your coffee, who laughed with her customers, and was admired for her beauty and charm. Her name was Anjette Lyles, and she looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine more than the front page of a crime report. To most people, she was simply a hardworking woman. She came from a stable family, she was popular in school, and she had that sort of presence that drew people in immediately. When she worked the floor at the local diner, customers would sit a little longer, hoping she'd come by their table just to talk. People didn't just come for the food, they came for her. But here's the question. I kept asking myself as I researched this case, how does a woman like that, young, beautiful, adored by her community, end up accused of murdering the people closest to her, and not just accused but convicted? The story of Anjette isn't just about poison and greed, though those things play a big role. It's also about appearances, about how much we want to believe in the image someone presents to us. Because the truth is, Anjette lived a double life. To the outside world, she was warm, magnetic, the woman who lit up a room. But behind closed doors, people around her started to fall mysteriously ill, one after another, until the whispers became too loud to ignore. So today, we're going to dig into the rise and fall of Anjette Lyles. From her early days at the diner, through her marriages, to the shocking string of deaths that followed her, and finally to the trial that sealed her fate. It's a story about charm, ambition, betrayal, and a darkness that no one wanted to believe until it was far too late. Let's begin. Chapter 2. Life in Macon, Georgia. When you picture Macon, Georgia in the 1950s, it wasn't the kind of place where you could hide from your neighbors. It was a small southern town, the kind where people nodded at each other on the street, and where gossip traveled faster than the Sunday paper. Everyone knew your name, and everyone knew your business. In towns like that, a diner wasn't just a place to grab food, it was the beating heart of the community. People came in for meatloaf and mashed potatoes, sure, but they stayed to talk, to catch up, to share the latest news. The diner was where lives overlapped, where deals were made, where secrets slipped out over cups of coffee. And in Macon, that place was Lyles's diner. It wasn't fancy, but it was famous for hearty comfort food, and soon it became the spot everyone wanted to be. Families came after church, teenagers came on dates, businessmen came for their midday lunches. If you lived in Macon, you knew Lyles. And this is where we first meet the woman at the center of today's story, Anjette. She wasn't just another waitress behind the counter, she was the reason people came back. Tall, blonde, and strikingly beautiful, she had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. She'd laugh, she'd chat, she'd sit with customers longer than she probably should, and people loved her for it. Her presence turned the diner into more than just a restaurant. It became a stage, and she was the star. Men admired her, women envied her, and everyone in Macon knew her name. To them, she was the charming face of Lyles's, the young woman who seemed destined for a bright and happy future. But what no one could have imagined was how central this diner and Anjette herself would become to one of the darkest crime stories Georgia had ever seen. Chapter 3. Ben Lyle and the First Tragedy. After high school, Anjette's beauty and charm kept drawing people in, and it wasn't long before she caught the eye of a local boy named Ben Lyle. Ben had just come back from World War II, and by all accounts he was considered a catch. He was young, handsome, and carried the kind of respect that came with being a veteran. For a woman like Anjette, who loved attention and admired status, Ben seemed like the perfect match. The two fell for each other quickly and wasted no time in getting married. Not long after, they welcomed their first daughter, Marsha. With Ben's family already running a successful local diner, it seemed like everything in Anjette's life was falling into place. She began working at Lyles's diner alongside her mother-in-law, Julia, and as usual, customers adored her. She wasn't just a waitress, she was the reason people kept coming back. But behind that bright image, cracks were already forming in the Lyle household. Ben carried more than just memories from the war. He had come home with an illness that left his throat constantly infected and caused him tremendous pain. At first, he was able to get by with the help of a military pension, but the longer it went on, the less he was able to work. And when the government finally cut off his benefits, the family was left in serious financial trouble. Ben had always liked to gamble, but now it became a problem. Nights were spent drinking and losing money he didn't have. By the early 1950s, his debts had piled so high that his mother, Julia, made the heartbreaking decision to sell the family diner in an attempt to save her son. For Julia, it was a sacrifice made out of love, but for Anjette, it felt like betrayal. The diner wasn't just a job for her, it was her world, her identity. Losing it drove a wedge deeper between her and Ben. Then, almost as if on cue, Ben's health took a sudden turn for the worse. The timing was suspicious just as the pension stopped, and the debts became overwhelming. His mysterious illness grew more severe. He suffered nosebleed seizures and weakness that doctors couldn't explain. He was hospitalized for over 2 months, drifting in and out of consciousness, until finally, in January of 1952, he slipped into a coma and never woke up. Ben's death was devastating, or at least it should have been. For most young widows, this would have been a breaking point. But with Anjette, people couldn't help noticing how quickly she seemed to regain her footing. She moved back in with her parents, brought Marsha with her, and kept working at other restaurants. Outwardly, she played the role of the grieving widow, but inwardly it was clear she had her eyes on something bigger. Looking back, many people in Macon would say that this was the first warning sign that death had entered Anjette's orbit, and no one thought to question it. To them, Ben's passing was just a tragic coincidence, the result of a war injury that never fully healed. But for those of us examining the case today, it feels less like fate and more like the beginning of a very deliberate pattern. Chapter 4. Rebuilding and New Love. After Ben's death, Anjette could have faded quietly into the background, a young widow raising her daughter in small-town Georgia. But that wasn't who she was. Anjette wasn't the kind of woman who accepted a quiet life. She wanted more, and she had the charm and determination to get it. She went back to doing what she knew best, working in restaurants. Even when she was just another waitress in someone else's diner, customers still gravitated toward her. She had a way of making people feel important, of leaning in and listening just enough to keep them talking. For 3 years, she hustled, saved, and worked tirelessly. And then, in 1955, she did something that made the whole town stop and take notice. She bought back the old Lyles diner. But this time, it wasn't the Lyles diner anymore. It was hers. She renamed it Anjette's, and in doing so, she rebranded her entire life. She hired back some of the old staff, even her mother-in-law Julia, and soon the diner was thriving again. For a woman in the 1950s, especially a widow, it was an impressive accomplishment. People admired her grit. They admired her independence, and they couldn't help but notice that Anjette always seemed to land on her feet. It wasn't just her career that was taking off. Her personal life was too. That same year, a handsome pilot named Joe Buddy Gabbert started coming around the diner. He was tall, confident, and well-traveled, the kind of man who stood out in a small town. For Anjette, who loved attention and excitement, Buddy was irresistible. The two began a whirlwind romance, and before the end of 1955, they had surprised everyone by getting married. To outsiders, it looked like a fairy tale widowed young Anjette had rebuilt her life, reclaimed her business, and found love again. But beneath that picture-perfect surface, the rumors were already starting. People whispered that Anjette was restless, that she liked other men even while Buddy was away flying. They whispered about her fascination with psychics, about the candles and strange rituals she supposedly performed in private. In a town as small as Macon, secrets didn't stay hidden for long, and Anjette was becoming the subject of more and more gossip. Still, she carried herself like nothing was wrong. She had the diner, the car, the new house, and now a new husband. To anyone looking in from the outside, Anjette Lyles was living the dream, but the people closest to her, the ones who loved her, were about to find out just how dangerous that dream really was. Chapter 5. Buddy's Mysterious Death. At first, Anjette's second marriage looked like a fresh start. Buddy was handsome, successful, and his job as a pilot gave her the lifestyle she wanted. But the honeymoon didn't last long. By the end of 1955, the very same year they married, Buddy suddenly fell ill. It began after a minor surgery on his wrist. Nothing serious, nothing anyone expected complications from. But soon after, Buddy developed a strange rash, followed by a fever. His condition worsened so quickly that he was rushed back to the hospital. Doctors couldn't figure out what was happening. They tried treatment after treatment, but his health only spiraled downward. The people in Macon couldn't help noticing the eerie similarity to what had happened to Ben Anjette's first husband. Both men young, both men healthy until suddenly they weren't both hospitalized for weeks, their symptoms baffling doctors. And then just like Ben, Buddy died. He had only been married to Anjette for a matter of months. His death left the community shaken, but also confused. How could two young, seemingly strong men in the prime of their lives collapse so suddenly under Anjette's roof? After Buddy's passing, doctors asked Anjette for permission to perform an autopsy. They wanted answers, but she refused. She told them Buddy would never want his body cut open, and that was the end of it. Without an autopsy, his cause of death remained a mystery. And while Buddy's family grieved, Anjette seemed to move on with striking speed. Almost as soon as he was buried, she changed her name back to Lyles, as if the marriage had never happened. Not long after, she filed the paperwork to collect Buddy's life insurance policy. With the money, she bought herself a new house, a brand new Cadillac, and settled back into her role as the successful, glamorous diner owner in Macon. From the outside, she looked unstoppable. Twice widowed, before the age of 30, yet still standing tall, still smiling behind the counter, still drawing people in with her charm. But underneath that shine, the whispers in town grew louder. People began to wonder, was Anjette cursed, or was something far more sinister going on? Chapter 6. Julia's Final Days. After Buddy's death, Anjette didn't stay alone for long. She had money from the life insurance, a brand new house with plenty of space, and she invited her former mother-in-law, Julia, to live with her and the children. To the outside world, it seemed like such a kind gesture. Julia had just lost her son, and here was Anjette, the young widow, opening her home and her heart. Neighbors thought it was generous. They said, "What an angel Anjette is, taking care of Julia in her time of grief." But behind closed doors, the relationship between the two women wasn't so gentle. Julia was older, practical, and cautious, while Anjette was ambitious and increasingly focused on securing her financial future. There were whispers of tension, especially when it came to Julia's estate. Julia wasn't in a rush to write a new will. She didn't want to think about her own death, and she certainly didn't want to be pressured. But Anjette kept bringing it up again and again, pushing for changes that would ensure she and her children would benefit. By 1957, Julia's health began to decline. At first, it seemed like the natural ailments of age fatigue, weakness, aches, and pains. But soon her condition worsened dramatically. She was admitted to the hospital, where her symptoms mirrored those of Ben and Buddy before her. Doctors struggled to understand what was wrong. And through it all, Anjette was there by her bedside, visiting, often bringing in meals from the diner. To the nurses, it looked like devotion. They praised her for being such a loving daughter-in-law. But Julia never recovered. In September of that year, she died in the hospital, her cause of death officially listed as unknown. Another loss, another tragedy for Anjette's circle. 3 close family members gone in just a few years. And then came the twist. Almost immediately after Julia's death, Anjette announced that she had found her mother-in-law's will. Conveniently, it had been discovered in Julia's handbag, and wouldn't you know it, the terms favored Anjette heavily. 1/3 of the estate to Julia's son, 1/3 to her grandchildren, and 1/3 directly to Anjette. Of course, with her children being minors under her care, much of their share essentially came under her control as well. To some in town, this seemed like fortune smiling on Anjette yet again. But to others, it was becoming harder to ignore the pattern. People around her kept dying, and somehow she always came out ahead. The gossip that had been simmering in Macon was starting to boil, and soon the spotlight would shift onto someone much closer to Anjette than a husband or a mother-in-law. This time, it would be her own daughter. Chapter 7: The Death of Marsha. By the late 1950s, the town of Macon had grown suspicious of Anjette. Too many people around her had fallen ill. Too many lives had ended with no explanation. But gossip is one thing, and proof is another. And until then, all anyone had were whispers. That all changed in 1958 when tragedy struck inside Anjette's own family again, this time with her 9-year-old daughter Marsha. Marsha had grown up in the diner, practically raised among the clatter of dishes and the smell of fried chicken and coffee. Everyone in town knew her. She was lively, friendly, and in many ways the bright little shadow always trailing after her glamorous mother. People saw them together every day, and in some ways Marsha humanized Anjette. For all her drama, for all the rumors swirling around here, she was a mother who clearly loved her child. Or at least, that's what people wanted to believe. But then Marsha fell ill. She was admitted to the same hospital where Buddy and Julia had once been treated, and strangely enough, even placed in the same room. At first, doctors were hopeful. Marsha's condition was serious, but she was young and strong. She showed signs of improvement. Nurses reassured Anjette, telling her that her daughter was recovering, that she was going to be okay. And that's when things took a chilling turn. Instead of celebrating the news, Anjette told them flatly, "No. She's going to die." She claimed a psychic had told her so, that it was fate. But she spoke with such certainty that it unnerved everyone who heard it. What kind of mother predicts her own child's death? Her actions made it even worse. While Marsha lay in her hospital bed, Anjette quietly ordered a coffin. She removed the get-well cards and flowers from her daughter's room, telling staff they wouldn't be needed. To the nurses, it was unsettling. To the townspeople who later heard about it, it was horrifying. And then, almost as if on cue, Marsha's condition declined. Within weeks, she was gone. Just 9 years old, and she died in the same hospital bed as her stepfather and grandmother before her. This time, though, things were different. Marsha wasn't a distant husband or an older relative. She was a child innocent and beloved by the entire town. Her death shattered whatever patience Macon had left. The community that once admired Anjette now turned on her completely. People began to speak openly, no longer just in hushed tones. They said what they had been afraid to say before, that Anjette was dangerous, that death followed her wherever she went. Nurses questioned her strange behavior in the hospital. Neighbors remembered the way she treated Marsha in public, sharp words, quick tempers, anger that didn't seem to fit the image she projected. And for the first time, authorities began to take those suspicions seriously. The death of Marsha wasn't just another tragedy, it was the breaking point. The town of Macon was ready to demand answers, and the walls around Anjette were beginning to close in. Chapter 8: The Investigation unfolds. After Marsha's death, the town of Macon had reached its limit. People had looked the other way when Ben died, whispered when Buddy passed, and murmured uneasily when Julia followed. But when a 9-year-old child was buried, the silence ended. This time the authorities couldn't ignore it. Rumors had been swirling for years, and now nurses, employees, and neighbors started stepping forward. They talked about the way Anjette behaved at the hospital, how she brought food in from the diner, how she'd sneak off with the trays before delivering them to her sick relatives. They remembered the bottles of ant poison she had purchased supposedly for an infestation no one else ever saw, and they began to connect the dots. The coroner took another look, starting with Marsha. Her first autopsy had found nothing unusual, but when her body was sent to a facility with better equipment, the truth emerged: traces of arsenic still present in her system. It was the evidence they needed. Investigators began to wonder if Marsha had arsenic in her body. What about the others, Ben, Buddy, Julia? Their bodies were exhumed, and each one told the same story. Arsenic. Every single one of them had died the same way. It was no longer a tragic coincidence, it was a pattern, a deadly, deliberate pattern. And every path led back to the same person, Anjette. The deeper police dug, the worse it looked. Nurses admitted that Anjette often insisted on feeding her family herself, even when hospital staff told her not to bring outside food. Employees from the diner spoke about her obsession with the poison, how she stored it, how she always seemed to have excuses for why she needed it. And then there was the gossip about the psychics, the candles, the strange rituals in the back of the diner. For a long time, people had dismissed it as superstition or small-town chatter. But now, against the backdrop of multiple arsenic deaths, those whispers started to feel like warning signs. And while investigators built their case, townspeople shared one more troubling detail: how Anjette behaved after each death. There were no tears, no breakdowns, no signs of grief that anyone could recall. What they remembered instead was how quickly she moved on, filing insurance claims, buying a new house, a new car, showing off her fortune, while the rest of the community was still in shock. By the spring of 1958, the case against Anjette was undeniable, with 4 confirmed victims, all tied to her. Authorities finally made their move. The woman who had once been the darling of Macon, the glamorous face behind the town's favorite diner, was now being led away in handcuffs. It was a shocking sight. Customers who once flocked to her counter for a smile and a slice of pie now lined the streets to watch her arrested, whispering to each other that maybe the rumors had been true all along. The spell Anjette had cast over Macon was broken, and the trial that followed would show just how cold and calculated she had really been. Chapter 9. The Trial of Anjette. Lyles. When Anjette was finally brought to trial, the whole town of Macon, and honestly, much of Georgia, was watching. People had followed the case in whispers for years, but now the rumors were laid out in open court. 4 deaths, 4 people poisoned with arsenic. And at the center of it all, one woman who had always managed to smile her way through life. Prosecutors presented the evidence methodically. They showed how Ben, Buddy, Julia, and Marsha had all died with arsenic in their systems. They brought in witnesses, nurses who recalled Anjette sneaking food into the hospital employees, who remembered the suspicious bottle of ant poison, and neighbors who noticed how quickly she benefited from life insurance policies and wills after each death. It should have been overwhelming, but Anjette wasn't the type to back down quietly. In a move that shocked many, she chose to represent herself. She believed that if she could just speak directly to the jury, charm them the way she had charmed the town for years, she could convince them of her innocence. She delivered long, emotional statements about how much she loved her family, how devastated she was by their deaths. She insisted she would never hurt those closest to her. But the jurors weren't buying it, not when every piece of evidence told a different story. And then came the most bizarre twist of the trial: the letter. Anjette produced what she claimed was a handwritten confession from her late mother-in-law, Julia. In the letter, Julia supposedly admitted to poisoning her own son, Ben, poisoning Buddy, and finally poisoning herself. According to Anjette, Julia was the real killer, and she had left behind this confession as proof. It might have seemed like a clever move, except for one problem. The letter was a fake. Anjette's own maid took the stand and told the jury that Anjette had asked her to lie to say she found the letter in Julia's handbag. The maid admitted the truth: Anjette herself had written the letter and tried to pass it off as Julia's. In that moment, whatever credibility she had left evaporated. The jury didn't take long. After less than an hour of deliberation, they returned with their verdict: guilty. The sentence was death by electric chair. For a brief moment, it seemed like justice had been served. The glamorous young widow who had once run the most popular diner in town was now a convicted murderer. But this story wasn't quite over, because before the sentence could be carried out, questions about her mental state would come into play, and they would change the ending of her story. Chapter 10. The Final Years. After the verdict was read, Anjette Lyles was sentenced to die in the electric chair. For the people of Macon, it felt like closure. 4 lives had been lost, and now the woman believed responsible would face the ultimate punishment. But as with everything in Anjette's life, nothing was ever quite so simple. Her defense team filed appeals, and while none of them overturned the conviction they did raise, one crucial question was Anjette sane. A committee of doctors was brought in to evaluate her. After weeks of observation, they concluded she was schizophrenic. And under Georgia law, that meant the death penalty could not be carried out. Instead of heading to death row, Anjette was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Insane in Milledgeville, Georgia. There she lived out the rest of her days, far from the diner she once ruled, and the adoring crowds that used to hang on her every word. Even inside the hospital, though Anjette never stopped manipulating. Fellow patients later recalled that she was sharp, cunning, and calculating. One even claimed that Anjette confided in her, saying she would never allow herself to be declared sane, because if she did, she would be sent back to prison and possibly face execution. She understood the system, and she played it to her advantage until the very end. For nearly 2 decades, she remained in that institution, her once glamorous life reduced to hospital walls and medical charts. And in December of 1977, at the age of 52, Anjette Lyles died there, still officially classified as mentally ill, still never having fully faced the punishment handed down by the jury. Looking back, her story is both shocking and tragic. Shocking because of the cold calculation it took to slowly poison 4 people she claimed to love. Tragic because of the community she shattered, the trust she betrayed, and most of all, the innocent life of her daughter Marsha. Today, Anjette's name isn't remembered as the beautiful young woman who ran the best diner in Macon. Instead, it stands as a chilling reminder that evil can wear a smile, pour your coffee, and charm an entire town before revealing its true face. And that, friends, is the tragic and terrifying story of Anjette Lyles. A woman who seemed to have it all: beauty, charm, success, yet used it all to hide something far more sinister. She poisoned 4 people over the span of just a few years, including her own 9-year-old daughter. And even though she was convicted, she never faced the punishment the jury intended, spending the rest of her life in a mental hospital instead. What makes this case so disturbing isn't just the number of victims, it's the way she fooled almost everyone around her. People saw her as generous, hardworking, even glamorous, when in reality she was slowly destroying the very people who trusted her the most. So, what do you think? Was justice really served in the end? Or did Anjette manage to manipulate her way out of true accountability even to her dying day? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true crime cases that still echo through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, take care of yourselves, make good choices, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who smile the brightest.